The pregnant bobcat collapsed on Emma's doorstep, golden eyes pleading for help as the merciless blizzard raged. It was her house cat's reaction, calm curiosity instead of terror, that defied nature itself and changed everything. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The bitter Montana winter showed no mercy that February morning. Snow fell in thick, relentless sheets, blanketing the landscape in pristine white as temperatures plummeted to record lows. Inside their cozy cabin nestled against the edge of the Bitterroot National Forest, Emma Reynolds sipped her coffee and watched the storm through frost-kissed windows. The crackling fireplace cast dancing shadows across the rustic living room, where her orange tabby cat, Rusty, lounged contentedly on the hearth rug. "Another day trapped inside, buddy," Emma murmured to the cat, who responded with a lazy blink of his amber eyes. At 34, Emma had left behind her hectic life as a wildlife veterinarian in Missoula to embrace the solitude of rural living. The remote cabin, inherited from her grandfather, had become both sanctuary and office as she wrote her book on North American predator conservation. Little did she know that the peaceful rhythm of her snowbound morning was about to be shattered by an encounter that would challenge everything she thought she knew about wild animals and the thin line between wilderness and civilization. The first sign came shortly after noon. Rusty, typically the most relaxed creature in 3 counties, suddenly perked up, his ears swiveling toward the front door like radar dishes. A low, cautious growl rumbled in his chest. "What is it, boy?" Emma asked, setting aside her laptop. The tabby had risen to his feet, tail swishing with uncharacteristic agitation. Before Emma could investigate, a sound reached her ears. Not the howling wind, but something else. Something alive. It began as a faint scratching against the wooden door, then escalated to a series of distinctive thumps. Emma froze. Bears were hibernating this time of year, but mountain lions occasionally prowled close to human habitations when hunger drove them from the high country. Whatever waited on her porch, it wasn't a casual visitor. The scratching came again, more insistent this time. Rusty's growl deepened, his fur standing on end as he positioned himself between Emma and the door. "Easy, Rusty," she whispered, reaching for the shotgun she kept mounted above the fireplace, a precaution her grandfather had insisted upon when she'd moved in. Emma had never fired it outside of a training range, but its weight felt reassuring in her hands as she approached the entrance. The peephole revealed nothing but swirling snow. Whatever had made the noise wasn't visible from that angle. Emma hesitated, her training as a wildlife specialist warring with basic survival instinct. Curiosity finally won. She cracked open the door just enough to peer around the edge, shotgun ready. What she saw stole her breath away. Huddled against the porch railing, nearly camouflaged by driving snow, was a bobcat. Not just any bobcat, a female, her spotted coat dusted with ice crystals, her usually proud posture hunched against the biting cold. Emma's trained eye immediately noted the animal's distended belly. Pregnant. Very pregnant. Emma's mind raced. Bobcats typically gave birth in spring, not the dead of winter. Something was wrong with this cycle, dangerously wrong. The wild feline's sides heaved with labored breathing, and her normally alert eyes showed the glassy look of exhaustion. "Oh my God," Emma breathed, momentarily forgetting the shotgun in her hands. The bobcat's ears twitched at the sound of her voice. Instead of fleeing, as any wild predator should, the animal took a tentative step toward the door, then stopped. Their eyes met across the threshold, and in that frozen moment Emma felt something pass between them. A desperate plea that transcended the natural barriers between human and wildlife. Behind her, Rusty had stopped growling. The orange tabby now stood at Emma's feet, his previous aggression replaced with something that looked remarkably like curiosity. He meowed softly, tilting his head as he studied the wild visitor. The bobcat's eyes shifted to the house cat, and Emma tensed, ready to slam the door if the predator showed any sign of aggression toward her pet. Instead, the bobcat sank to her belly on the porch, a position that looked both exhausted and submissive. "This is insane," Emma muttered, but 10 years of wildlife rehabilitation had taught her to recognize an animal in crisis. The bobcat was seeking shelter, seeking help, behavior so extraordinary it defied everything Emma knew about these solitary, shy creatures. A particularly violent gust of wind sent snow swirling around the bobcat, who flinched but didn't move from her position. Emma made a decision that flew in the face of protocol, training, and common sense. "I must be out of my mind," she said as she stepped back from the door, opening it wider. "Come on, before we both freeze to death." The bobcat didn't move immediately, her wild instincts clearly battling against her desperate situation. It was Rusty who broke the impasse. To Emma's astonishment, her normally cautious house cat approached the open door, stopping just at the threshold. He sat down, tail curled around his feet, and blinked slowly at the wild feline, a cat signal of non-aggression. The bobcat blinked back. Then, with agonizing slowness, she rose and limped across the threshold into Emma's cabin. Emma quietly closed the door behind her, shutting out the howling storm. The bobcat immediately retreated to the farthest corner of the room, pressing her body against the wall, wild eyes tracking every movement. Rusty, displaying a boldness that left Emma speechless, followed at a respectful distance. He settled about 5 feet from the bobcat, grooming himself casually, as if to demonstrate that everything was perfectly normal about this situation. "Unbelievable," Emma whispered, setting the shotgun aside but keeping it within reach. Her veterinary instincts had kicked in, assessing the bobcat from across the room. The animal was severely dehydrated, her coat lacking the healthy luster it should have. The swollen belly suggested late-term pregnancy, but the bobcat's overall condition was too poor for a healthy mother. Something had gone very wrong for this wild creature. Emma's phone lay on the coffee table. She could call Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks, should call them. This was a wild predator in her living room, for heaven's sake. They would bring a transport cage, take the bobcat to a wildlife center. Protocol was clear. But even as her fingers reached for the phone, Emma hesitated. The storm outside had reached blizzard conditions, making the 40-mile drive to the nearest wildlife facility treacherous, if not impossible. By the time help arrived, it might be too late for the bobcat and her unborn kittens. Rusty meowed softly, drawing Emma's attention. Her house cat had settled into a sphinx position, still watching the bobcat with that same unnerving intensity. The wild feline had relaxed marginally, her breathing slightly less labored as the cabin's warmth began to penetrate her frozen coat. "Okay," Emma said decisively, more to herself than either cat. "First things first." She moved slowly to the kitchen, filling a shallow bowl with water. With deliberate, non-threatening movements, she placed it halfway between herself and the bobcat, then retreated. The wild cat watched suspiciously, but made no move toward the offering. Again, it was Rusty who intervened. The orange tabby approached the water bowl, took a few demonstrative laps, then backed away, looking expectantly at the bobcat. A full minute of tense silence passed before the pregnant feline finally eased forward on trembling legs. She sniffed the water cautiously, then began to drink with increasing desperation. Emma watched in wonder. "You're the bobcat whisperer now, Rusty," she murmured in disbelief. The house cat merely blinked at her, as if to say this was all perfectly obvious. As the bobcat drank, Emma's mind raced through options. She had basic veterinary supplies, remnants from her previous career, and experience with wildlife. But a pregnant bobcat was far beyond anything she'd handled alone, especially one in distress. The wild feline finished drinking and looked up, meeting Emma's gaze. Those yellow eyes held a primordial wildness, yet there was something else there now, a tentative trust born of desperation. The bobcat retreated to her corner, curling around her swollen belly with a small sound that might have been pain. "Hang on," Emma whispered, reaching for her medical kit. "Just hang on." Outside, the blizzard intensified, sealing them in a world of white isolation. Inside, an unprecedented drama was unfolding, a drama of survival, instinct, and the mysterious connection between two felines from different worlds. Rusty settled himself halfway between Emma and the wild visitor, a small orange bridge between civilization and wilderness. As Emma prepared her supplies, she knew the real challenge was just beginning. Whatever happened next would depend not just on her skills, but on the extraordinary behavior of her ordinary house cat, and the mysterious instinct that had driven a wild bobcat to seek human help in her darkest hour. Emma had treated injured wildlife before, everything from orphan bear cubs to concussed eagles, but never in her living room, and certainly never with only her house cat as an assistant. She moved with deliberate slowness, keeping her voice low and soothing as she gathered supplies from her emergency medical kit. "Easy now," she murmured, though she wasn't sure if she was reassuring the bobcat, Rusty, or herself. "We're going to figure this out together." The pregnant bobcat remained in her corner, yellow eyes tracking Emma's every movement. Her sides heaved with each labored breath, and occasional tremors ran through her powerful frame. Emma recognized the signs. This wasn't just exhaustion or cold. The bobcat was in the early stages of labor, and something wasn't right. Rusty, meanwhile, had established himself as an unlikely mediator. The orange tabby positioned himself strategically between Emma and the wild visitor, occasionally blinking slowly at the bobcat in that distinctly feline expression of trust. More remarkably, the bobcat returned these slow blinks, though her body remained tense and alert. Emma's mind raced through her veterinary training. Bobcats typically sought secluded, protected dens for birth, caves, hollow logs, dense thickets. For this female to seek human shelter instead, her situation must be dire indeed. The unnatural timing, bobcats usually gave birth in spring, not the dead of winter, suggested something had disrupted her normal cycle. "You need a safe space," Emma said softly, thinking aloud. "Somewhere dark, quiet and warm." The spare bedroom was small and rarely used, with a closet that might serve as an improvised den. Emma began gathering soft blankets, old towels, and a plastic tarp to protect the floor. Throughout her preparations, she maintained a running commentary, keeping her voice gentle and consistent to help the wild cat acclimate to her presence. "I'm going to set up a space for you," she explained, knowing the bobcat couldn't understand her words but might respond to her calm tone. "Then we'll need to check you over, see what's happening with those babies of yours." The real challenge would be moving the bobcat from the living room to the makeshift birthing den. Emma considered her options, none of them ideal. Attempting to handle the wild cat directly was dangerous. Even a bobcat in distress had powerful jaws and claws that could inflict serious damage. Tranquilizing her was out of the question. Sedatives could harm the unborn kittens and complicate an already difficult labor. Once again, it was Rusty who provided the solution. As Emma finished preparing the spare room, her orange tabby rose and stretched elaborately. He approached the bobcat, not directly but at an angle, his body language non-threatening. Then he meowed softly and turned toward the hallway, looking back expectantly at the wild feline. When the bobcat didn't immediately follow, Rusty repeated the performance, this time walking a few steps down the hall before pausing to look back. "Rusty, what are you doing?" Emma whispered, amazed. The bobcat's ears flicked forward with interest. She rose unsteadily to her feet, still pressed against the wall, but her attention was fixed on the domestic cat. Rusty meowed again, more insistently, and took another few steps toward the spare room. Incredibly, the bobcat began to follow. Emma stood perfectly still as the pregnant wildcat limped past her, maintaining a wary distance, but clearly following Rusty's lead. The house cat proceeded down the hallway with the dignity of a royal escort, tail held high, occasionally glancing back to ensure his charge was following. "Unbelievable," Emma breathed as the unlikely pair disappeared into the spare bedroom. She waited a full minute before following, moving quietly to avoid startling the bobcat. The scene in the bedroom left her momentarily speechless. Rusty had led the wildcat directly to the closet, where Emma had arranged the blankets into a nest-like structure. The bobcat was already circling inside the small space, her instincts driving her to prepare for birth despite her exhaustion. Rusty sat just outside the closet door, grooming himself as if guiding pregnant bobcats was something he did every day. "You're something else, you know that?" Emma told her cat, shaking her head in wonder. Now came the difficult part. Emma needed to examine the bobcat to assess her condition, but approaching a wild predator in labor was asking for trouble. She would need to rely on observation rather than hands-on examination, at least until the bobcat became more accustomed to her presence. Emma settled on the floor a safe distance from the closet, medical kit beside her. "Let's just take it slow," she said softly. "You do what comes naturally, and I'll be here if you need help." The bobcat had completed her circling and now lay on her side in the nest of blankets, sides heaving. Her eyes remained fixed on Emma, but the wild fear had dimmed somewhat, replaced by the glazed look of an animal focused inward on the demanding process of birth. Rusty approached Emma and butted his head against her arm, his typical request for attention. She stroked him absently, her mind working through contingencies. If the birth proceeded normally, her best course was minimal intervention. But if complications arose, and the bobcat's exhausted condition suggested they might, decisions would need to be made quickly. "What happened to you out there?" Emma wondered aloud, studying the wildcat's condition. The bobcat's coat was matted in places, with what looked like healing scratches along one flank. "Did something drive you from your territory? Or someone?" The answers wouldn't come, of course, but Emma's trained eye was piecing together a story. This bobcat had been through some kind of ordeal before the storm, perhaps conflict with another predator or human disturbance of her habitat. Then the blizzard had struck, adding cold and hunger to her already compromised condition. Outside, the storm continued its assault, wind howling around the cabin's eaves. The security of shelter made the wilderness beyond seem all the more forbidding. Emma found herself wondering how many other creatures were struggling against the elements tonight, without the benefit of walls and warmth. As twilight deepened into night, Emma maintained her quiet vigil. She'd brought a camping lantern into the room, setting it to its dimmest setting to provide just enough light to monitor the bobcat without disturbing her. Rusty had settled himself halfway between Emma and the closet, apparently committed to his self-appointed role as intermediary. The bobcat's labor intensified as the hours passed. Her breathing became more rapid, punctuated by occasional low growls when contractions seized her. Emma watched for signs of distress beyond the normal stress of birth, ready to intervene if necessary, though still uncertain how she would manage it. Near midnight, the bobcat suddenly became more alert, raising her head and focusing intently on the closet entrance. A new tension filled her body, not pain this time, but purpose. "First one's coming," Emma whispered to Rusty, who had also sensed the change and was now sitting upright, ears forward with interest. The bobcat turned her attention to her hindquarters and nature took its course. Within minutes, a tiny, wet bundle emerged, the first kitten, no larger than Emma's palm. The bobcat immediately began cleaning the newborn with her rough tongue, removing the birth membrane and stimulating the tiny body to life. Emma held her breath as she watched the ancient miracle unfold. The kitten, slick and dark, squirmed under its mother's ministrations, then let out a squeaky sound that seemed impossibly small to come from a predator's offspring. "That's it," Emma encouraged softly. "Good mama." The bobcat's ears flicked in her direction, acknowledging her presence without fear. Then the wild mother returned to her work, guiding her firstborn to her belly, where it began to nurse with surprising vigor. One healthy kitten delivered, but Emma could tell from the bobcat's size that more were coming. The night was far from over, and the real challenges might just be beginning. Yet in this moment, watching the wild mother with her newborn, Emma felt a growing certainty that she had made the right decision in opening her door to this unexpected visitor. Rusty stretched out on the floor, seemingly content with how things were progressing. His calm presence continued to work its mysterious magic on the bobcat, who appeared to draw reassurance from the domestic cat's relaxed demeanor. Beyond the cabin walls, the blizzard raged on, indifferent to the small drama of life unfolding within. But inside, in the gentle glow of the lantern light, wilderness and civilization had found an unexpected common ground, all because a desperate mother had begged for help, and a house cat had somehow answered. The night deepened around the cabin as the storm intensified. Wind rattled the windows like skeletal fingers seeking entry, while inside, the primal drama of birth continued in its ancient rhythm. Emma maintained her vigil, watching as the bobcat mother cleaned and nursed her firstborn kitten. The tiny creature, eyes still sealed shut, kneaded at its mother's belly with miniature paws that already showed the promise of powerful claws. Emma checked her watch. Nearly an hour had passed since the first birth. For bobcats, the interval between kittens typically ranged from 15 minutes to an hour. The mother's continued labored breathing and restless movements suggested more were coming, but something in the wild cat's demeanor troubled Emma. The bobcat seemed increasingly exhausted, her cleaning of the first kitten becoming sporadic as she focused inward on her body's demands. "You're struggling, aren't you?" Emma murmured, shifting slightly closer. The bobcat's ears flattened momentarily, then relaxed, a warning but not an aggressive one. Her trust remained fragile, conditional on Emma maintaining a respectful distance. Rusty, however, operated under different rules. The orange tabby had been dozing lightly, but now rose and stretched, approaching the closet with that same unhurried confidence he'd shown earlier. The bobcat watched him come, her expression alert, but not threatened. When Rusty settled at the edge of the makeshift den, the wild mother actually seemed to relax slightly, as if drawing comfort from his presence. "What are you two talking about?" Emma whispered, fascinated by the unspoken communication passing between domestic and wild feline. The cats ignored her, locked in their private exchange of subtle ear movements and eye contact. Another contraction seized the bobcat, stronger than the previous ones. She growled low in her throat, her powerful body tensing with effort. Emma leaned forward, medical training overriding caution. Something wasn't right. The bobcat was straining too hard with too little progress. "Come on, Mama," Emma encouraged softly. "You can do this." The minutes stretched painfully as the bobcat struggled. The first kitten, disturbed by its mother's distress, began mewling pitifully. Rusty responded by moving closer to the tiny creature, beginning to groom it gently when the mother seemed unable to attend to it properly, behavior so unexpected that Emma could scarcely believe what she was seeing. More remarkable still was that the bobcat allowed it, focusing her remaining energy on the difficult birth in progress. After nearly 20 minutes of visible struggle, the bobcat let out a sound that was half growl, half whimper. Emma's concern deepened. As a wildlife veterinarian, she'd assisted in enough difficult animal births to recognize when intervention might be needed. But the question remained: how to help a wild predator that could seriously injure her if frightened or provoked by handling. The decision was made for her when the bobcat's next contraction produced a disturbing sight, a kitten emerging wrong, presenting feet first rather than the normal head-first position. The bobcat was trying to turn her body to reach the partially emerged kitten, but her exhaustion made the effort ineffective. Emma knew with cold certainty that without assistance, both the kitten and possibly the mother could die. She would need to help reposition the kitten to facilitate birth, a dangerous proposition with any wild animal, let alone a predator in distress. "Okay," Emma said, keeping her voice steady and calm despite her racing heart. "We need to do this together, Mama. I'm going to help your baby." She reached for her medical kit, extracting a pair of surgical gloves and a small bottle of antiseptic. As she prepared, she continued speaking in that same gentle, rhythmic tone, hoping the sound of her voice would help the bobcat associate her approach with safety rather than threat. Rusty, remarkably, seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. The orange tabby positioned himself near the bobcat's head, purring loudly, a sound known to have calming effects on both cats and humans. The bobcat's eyes remained fixed on Emma, but the expected aggression didn't materialize. Instead, the wild mother's gaze held something like desperate hope, as if she somehow understood that this human represented her kitten's best chance at survival. "I'm coming closer now," Emma narrated her movements, inching forward on her knees. "Just going to help this little one out, then I'll back away. Promise." The critical moment came as Emma finally reached the birthing nest. The bobcat tensed but didn't strike, her exhaustion perhaps overriding her defensive instincts. With trembling hands, Emma gently grasped the partially emerged kitten, supporting its tiny body while carefully maneuvering it into the correct position. The bobcat growled once softly, but allowed the contact. "Almost there," Emma whispered, her medical training taking over. With minimal manipulation, she managed to reposition the kitten, then carefully supported its head as it finally emerged fully. Unlike its sibling, this kitten didn't immediately move or cry. Emma's heart sank as she quickly cleared fluid from its tiny mouth and nose, then gently rubbed its chest with one finger to stimulate breathing. "Come on, little fighter," she urged, "take a breath." After what seemed an eternity but was probably only seconds, the kitten shuddered and let out a weak mewl. Relief flooded through Emma as the tiny creature began to breathe regularly. She carefully placed the newborn within reach of its mother, then backed away, giving the bobcat space to tend to her offspring. The wild mother immediately began cleaning the second kitten, her movements more vigorous now that the difficult birth was over. The tiny creature responded to her ministrations, its small body wriggling with newfound life. Emma retreated to her original position, emotionally drained but exhilarated. She had just handled a wild bobcat's newborn and lived to tell the tale, an experience few wildlife veterinarians could claim outside of a clinical setting with sedated animals. "We did it, Rusty," she whispered to her cat, who had resumed his position between human and wild feline. The orange tabby blinked at her slowly, then turned his attention back to the bobcat family. Over the next 2 hours, 2 more kittens arrived, these births proceeding more smoothly than the second, though it was clear the bobcat's strength was flagging with each delivery. By the time the 4th and final kitten emerged just before dawn, the wild mother was trembling with exhaustion, barely able to complete the necessary cleaning and stimulation. Once again, Rusty intervened in his mysterious way, grooming the newest arrivals when their mother's energy faltered. The bobcat accepted this assistance with what appeared to be grateful resignation, focusing what remained of her strength on nursing her litter. Emma watched in wonder as her house cat assumed the role of midwife and nursemaid to wild creatures that, under normal circumstances, might have been his mortal enemies. Rusty's behavior defied conventional understanding of feline territorial instincts, yet there was no denying the gentle care he showed toward the vulnerable newborns. As the first pale light of dawn filtered through the curtains, Emma surveyed the improbable scene before her. 4 bobcat kittens, eyes still sealed shut, huddled against their mother's belly. Rusty curled protectively nearby, and herself, cross-legged on the floor of her spare bedroom, participating in a moment of interspecies cooperation that few would believe possible. The bobcat mother's eyes were growing heavy, the demands of birth finally giving way to exhaustion. As she drifted toward sleep, her vigilance relaxed enough that Rusty was able to settle closer, his orange fur almost touching the wildcat's spotted coat. The contrast between them was striking, the pampered house cat with his sleek ginger fur alongside the battle-worn predator, whose very presence in this human dwelling defied natural law. Emma's scientific mind struggled to make sense of what she was witnessing. The conventional explanation, that extreme circumstances had temporarily overridden the bobcat's natural wariness, seemed insufficient to explain the level of trust the wild mother was displaying. Something deeper was at work here, something that transcended the usual boundaries between domestic and wild, human and animal. Outside, the blizzard was beginning to abate, the howling wind fading to occasional gusts as the storm moved eastward. Soon the world would emerge from its snowbound isolation, and Emma would need to make decisions about her unusual guests. For now, though, she was content to observe this extraordinary tableau. 4 new lives beginning their journey under the most unlikely of circumstances, guarded by a mother from the wilderness and a cat from the hearth. "Rest now," Emma whispered to the bobcat, whose yellow eyes had finally closed in exhausted sleep. "You're safe here." As if in response, Rusty looked back at his human companion and slowly blinked, that timeless feline gesture of affection and trust. In that moment, Emma felt connected to something ancient and profound, the silent understanding that sometimes passed between species when the artificial boundaries of human and wild temporarily dissolved. Dawn broke fully over the snow-covered landscape, marking the end of the storm and the beginning of a new chapter in this unexpected story. A story that had begun with a desperate mother at the door and now continued with 4 tiny lives, depending on an improvised family unlike any Emma could have imagined. Morning light transformed Emma's cabin, turning shadowed corners golden as the world outside sparkled beneath its fresh blanket of snow. The storm had passed, leaving behind a pristine wilderness and roads that would likely remain impassable for days. Emma stood at her kitchen window, coffee in hand, watching as plumes of wood smoke rose from her chimney into the crystal-clear sky. Her mind, however, remained in the spare bedroom where her improbable guests slept. She'd left the bobcat mother and her newborns only after ensuring all 5 were stable, the wildcat sleeping deeply while her kittens nursed. Rusty had remained with them, appointed guardian by some unspoken agreement Emma couldn't begin to comprehend. The scene had been so peaceful, so contrary to everything she knew about wild predators, that Emma had found herself questioning her own expertise. Now, in the clarifying light of morning, professional reality reasserted itself. She had a wild bobcat, a protected species under Montana law, in her home. Protocol demanded she contact wildlife authorities immediately. As a former wildlife veterinarian, she knew the regulations better than most. Wild animals belonged in appropriate facilities, not private homes, regardless of circumstances. Emma reached for her phone, then hesitated. The bobcat was in no condition to be moved, her kittens mere hours old and vulnerable. Even if she could get through to Fish and Wildlife, the roads wouldn't be cleared for days. Any transportation attempt would risk the entire family. For now, at least, they were staying put. Decision made, Emma prepared a shallow dish of water and found some leftover chicken in her refrigerator. The bobcat would need nourishment to maintain her strength for nursing. With these offerings, she quietly returned to the spare room. The scene that greeted her stopped her in the doorway. Rusty was no longer simply nearby, but had somehow integrated himself into the family group. The orange tabby lay curved against the bobcat's back, their bodies forming a protective circle around the kittens. More remarkably, both cats were awake, and neither showed signs of distress at this unprecedented proximity. "Well, I'll be damned," Emma whispered. At the sound of her voice, both feline heads turned in her direction. Rusty chirped a greeting, while the bobcat regarded her with alert, but no longer fearful eyes. The wild mother's gaze tracked to the food and water in Emma's hands, her interest evident. "Brought you breakfast," Emma said softly, setting the dishes just inside the closet door before backing away. "You need to keep your strength up for those little ones." The bobcat's hunger overcame any remaining wariness. She rose carefully, disturbing neither kittens nor housecat, and approached the offerings. Emma remained perfectly still as the wild cat drank deeply, then consumed the chicken with delicate efficiency. Throughout the meal, the bobcat kept one eye on her human benefactor, not in fear but in assessment, as if re-evaluating Emma's place in the new order of things. Once finished, the bobcat returned to her kittens, settling back into the nest. Remarkably, she seemed unbothered when Rusty resumed his position beside her, his ginger tail occasionally flicking across her spotted flank. Emma sat cross-legged on the floor, maintaining a respectful distance while observing this extraordinary tableau. Her scientific mind struggled to reconcile what she was seeing with known behaviors of wild bobcats. Nothing in her training or experience had prepared her for this level of acceptance between wild and domestic animals, especially competing predator species. "What's your story?" she asked the bobcat softly. "What happened out there that made you come to a human door?" The wild mother blinked slowly, revealing nothing. Emma's phone chimed in her pocket, the first signal that had gotten through since the storm peaked. She checked it to find 3 missed calls from Ben Eaglefeather, her closest neighbor, and the local game warden. Living 5 miles down the road, Ben had become a friend during Emma's 2 years in Montana, their shared interest in wildlife conservation bridging the initial gap between newcomer and lifelong resident. She stepped into the hallway to return his call, unwilling to disturb the peaceful scene in the bedroom. "Emma." "Thank God." Ben's deep voice carried relief when he answered. "You okay out there? That storm was a monster." "I'm fine," she assured him. "Snug as can be. How about you?" Generator kicked in when the power went. "Roads are a mess, though. County says it'll be at least 3 days before they clear out to your place." Emma hesitated, then made a decision. "Ben, I've got a situation here. Something you should probably know about. You're not hurt, are you?" Concern sharpened his tone. "No, nothing like that. I've got guests. A pregnant bobcat showed up at my door during the storm yesterday. She's delivered 4 kittens overnight." The silence that followed told Emma that Ben was processing this improbable statement. "You've got a wild bobcat in your house with kittens." His voice was carefully neutral. "Yes. And before you start quoting regulations at me, she was in distress. The storm was at its peak, and one of the births was complicated. They wouldn't have survived otherwise." Another silence, then a sigh. "Only you, Emma. Anyone else told me this story, I'd think they were pulling my leg." She could hear the smile in his voice now. "How's Mama doing?" "Surprisingly well, considering. But there's something else. Something I can't explain." Emma described Rusty's extraordinary behavior and the apparent bond forming between the 2 cats. "That's unusual," Ben said, master of understatement. "Never heard of anything like it." "Me neither. But I'm looking right at it." "Well, you know the protocol," Ben said, returning to his official capacity. as soon as the road's clear. I know, Emma interrupted. Believe me, I know. But Ben, there's something special happening here. Something worth documenting at least. The game warden was quiet for a moment. Tell you what, I've got a wildlife biologist friend at the university who specializes in predator behavior. Let me give her a call, see what she thinks. Meanwhile, you keep detailed records of everything you observe. Might be valuable research material, if nothing else. Thanks, Ben, Emma said, relief evident in her voice. I'll document everything. After ending the call, Emma returned to the spare room with her laptop. If this unprecedented situation was to have scientific value, she needed to record it properly. Setting up in the corner farthest from the nest, she began making detailed notes about the bobcat's condition, the kitten's development, and most importantly, the inexplicable behavior of her domestic cat. As she typed, Emma found herself repeatedly glancing up at Rusty, seeing her familiar companion in a new light. The orange tabby she'd adopted from a shelter 3 years ago had revealed depths she never suspected, an innate understanding of a wild creature's needs that transcended domestic boundaries. "Who are you really?" she murmured to her cat, who responded with a slow blink before returning his attention to the bobcat family. Around noon, the bobcat rose again, this time moving stiffly toward the door of the bedroom. Her intention was clear. Nature called, and wild instincts demanded privacy for such vulnerable moments. Emma quickly arranged a makeshift litter box in the bathroom, then stepped aside, giving the bobcat space to discover it. The wild mother paused at the bedroom threshold, visibly torn between bodily needs and maternal instinct. Her gaze returned to her kittens, reluctant to leave them unprotected. Then, in a moment that left Emma speechless, Rusty deliberately positioned himself beside the kittens, looking directly at the bobcat as if to say, "I'll watch them. Go." Whether the wild mother truly understood this silent communication was impossible to know, but after a moment's hesitation, she left the room. Emma heard the soft pad of paws as the bobcat investigated the bathroom, followed by the sound of sand being shifted in the litter box. Moments later, the wildcat returned, moving with purpose back to her kittens. She paused beside Rusty, and in a gesture that defied every natural law Emma thought she understood, briefly touched her nose to the house cat's ear before reclaiming her position in the nest. Emma's fingers hovered above her keyboard, struggling to find words that could adequately describe what she was witnessing. This wasn't simply tolerance or circumstantial cooperation. This was communication, understanding, perhaps even the beginnings of trust between wild and domestic animals that should, by all rights, view each other with suspicion, if not hostility. As the day progressed, Emma continued her documentation, capturing each feeding, each subtle interaction between the cats, each milestone in the newborn's development. The tiny bobcat kittens, no larger than hamsters, squirmed blindly against their mother's belly, already showing individual personalities in their movements and vocalizations. Outside, the sun began its early winter descent, casting long shadows across the snow-covered landscape. Emma rose to turn on a lamp, bringing gentle illumination to the room as darkness gathered. In the soft glow, the unlikely family tableau took on an almost mythic quality, a moment out of time where the usual rules of nature had been temporarily suspended. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Emma would need to consider long-term plans, consult with Ben's biologist friend, and begin thinking about eventual reintroduction to the wild. But for tonight, in the warmth of her isolated cabin, she was witnessing something precious and fleeting, a rare moment of harmony between worlds that normally existed in separation. Rusty looked up at her, his amber eyes reflecting the lamplight, and Emma felt a surge of pride in her ordinary house cat, who had proven himself extraordinary in ways she never could have imagined. 3 days passed in a strange, peaceful rhythm. The Bobcat mother, whom Emma had begun calling Luna for the perfect crescent marking on her left shoulder, settled into a routine of nursing, grooming, and cautious exploration of the bedroom. The kittens grew stronger by the hour, their tiny bodies plumping with their mother's milk, their mewling cries becoming more insistent as their lungs developed. Most remarkable was the continuing evolution of Luna and Rusty's unprecedented relationship. The orange tabby had fully integrated himself into the family unit, taking on roles that Emma's scientific training couldn't explain. He groomed the kittens when Luna needed to eat or rest. He positioned himself protectively at the closet entrance whenever Emma entered the room. Most extraordinarily, he seemed to be teaching the wild mother about domestic life, demonstrating litter box use and the safety of Emma's presence through his own relaxed behavior. Emma documented everything meticulously, filling pages with observations and questions that challenged her understanding of animal behavior. The roads remained largely impassable, giving her unexpected time with her remarkable guests before the outside world intruded. On the morning of the fourth day, Emma's satellite phone rang. She hurried to answer it, stepping into the hallway to avoid disturbing the cats. "Roads are clearing." Ben's voice greeted her without preamble. "Dr. Khatri should be able to make it out to you tomorrow if the county plows stay on schedule." "Your biologist friend?" Emma confirmed, a mixture of anticipation and apprehension stirring in her chest. "Mina Khatri, best wildlife behaviorist in 3 states. If anyone can make sense of what you're seeing, it's her." Ben paused. "How's the situation today?" Emma described the developing bond between the cats, trying to keep her tone professional despite her growing emotional investment in the unlikely family. "Fascinating," Ben said when she finished. "And the kittens are thriving?" "All 4, Emma confirmed. "Eyes still closed, of course, but they're gaining weight and showing good mobility. Luna's recovered remarkably well from the birth." "Luna?" Amusement colored Ben's voice. Emma felt herself flush. "Just for documentation purposes. Easier than saying the Bobcat in all my notes." "Uh-huh." Ben didn't sound convinced. "Well, Dr. Khatri will want to see everything. She's bringing specialized equipment to check the kitten's health without handling them too much. And Emma," his voice turned serious, "she'll be making recommendations about next steps." The implied meaning was clear. This extraordinary arrangement had an expiration date. The Bobcat family couldn't stay in Emma's spare bedroom indefinitely, no matter how well things were going. "I understand," Emma said, trying to keep disappointment from her voice. "I'll have everything ready for her review." After ending the call, Emma returned to the bedroom where she found Luna watching her with those intelligent yellow eyes. The Bobcat had become comfortable enough with Emma's presence to remain relaxed when she entered, though she still maintained a protective position near her kittens. "We're having company tomorrow," Emma told Luna softly. "Someone who might understand what's happening here better than I do." The Bobcat blinked slowly, then turned her attention to her kittens, where the smallest, a female with unusually dark markings, had wiggled away from the group. Luna gently pulled the kitten back with a careful paw, then began grooming her errant offspring. Rusty, who had been dozing nearby, rose and stretched before approaching Emma with his usual affectionate headbutt against her leg. She crouched to stroke him, marveling at his dual existence. One moment her ordinary house cat, the next an adoptive parent to wild predators. "You're going to have to explain yourself to Dr. Khatri," she told him, scratching under his chin. "Because I certainly can't explain you." Emma spent the rest of the day preparing for the biologist's visit, organizing her notes, setting up a proper workspace in the living room, and ensuring the cabin was warm and welcoming after what would certainly be a challenging drive for her visitor. Throughout her preparations, she found herself repeatedly drawn back to the bedroom, checking on the improbable family with a growing sense that she was witnessing something precious and fleeting. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Emma was awake early, anxiety about the coming evaluation making sleep difficult. She had just finished her second cup of coffee when the distant sound of an engine broke the winter silence. Through the front window, she watched a university-marked SUV navigate the final approach to her cabin, its tire chains crunching through the packed snow. A small, energetic woman emerged from the vehicle, bundled against the cold in a heavy parka. She retrieved a large equipment case from the back seat before making her way to Emma's door, with confident steps. "Dr. Reynolds, I'm Mina Khatri." The biologist's handshake was firm, her dark eyes bright with intelligence and curiosity. "Ben's told me quite a story about your house guests." "It's even more remarkable in person," Emma replied, helping Dr. Khatri with her equipment. "And please, call me Emma." "Mina, then?" The biologist smiled, shrugging off her heavy coat. "I've been studying predator behavior for 15 years, and I've never heard anything like what you've described. I'll admit I was skeptical until Ben vouched for you." Emma led her visitor to the living room where she'd prepared coffee and laid out her documentation. "I would have been skeptical too if I weren't seeing it with my own eyes." They spent an hour reviewing Emma's notes, with Mina asking precise, insightful questions that revealed her expertise. The biologist was particularly interested in the timeline, how quickly the wild bobcat had acclimated to human presence, and how the relationship with Rusty had developed. "In traditional scientific understanding, what you're describing shouldn't happen," Mina said, leaning back in her chair. "Wild predators, especially mothers with newborns, should be aggressively protective, not accepting of either human presence or another predator species near their young." "But it is happening," Emma said simply. "I can't explain it, but I can show you." Mina nodded, her expression a mixture of professional skepticism and barely contained excitement. "Let's see this miracle, then." They approached the spare bedroom carefully, with Emma leading the way. She opened the door slowly, narrating her movements as she'd been doing for days to help Luna associate her voice with non-threatening entry. "It's just me, Luna," she called softly. "I've brought a friend who wants to meet you and the kittens." The bedroom was warm and dim, with filtered sunlight creating dappled patterns on the floor. Luna was awake, positioned protectively near her kittens in the closet nest. Rusty lay nearby, his orange coat contrasting sharply with Luna's spotted fur. Both cats looked up as the humans entered, alert but not alarmed. Emma heard Mina's sharp intake of breath. "Extraordinary," the biologist whispered, her professional composure momentarily cracking at the sight of wild and domestic predators coexisting in such proximity. "Absolutely extraordinary." They settled on the floor at a respectful distance from the nest. Mina's trained eyes took in every detail: the bobcat's physical condition, the kitten's development, and most importantly, the interactions between the two adult cats. "The male is actually guarding them," she murmured, watching as Rusty positioned himself between the humans and the nest. "Not from us, but with her. A cooperative defense strategy." She shook her head in wonder. "I've documented cooperative behaviors between unrelated females of the same species, but never anything cross-species like this." As if to provide further evidence, Luna rose and stretched before approaching her water dish, leaving the kittens momentarily unattended. Without prompting, Rusty shifted position to place himself closer to the tiny bobcats, maintaining watchful vigilance until their mother returned. "It's like they've developed a mutual understanding," Emma said, "a language between them that goes beyond normal feline behavior." Mina nodded slowly, her scientific skepticism clearly battling with the evidence before her eyes. "There's something happening here that challenges conventional understanding of predator psychology. The question is it circumstantial, or is there something deeper at work?" Over the next several hours, Mina conducted non-invasive observations, using specialized equipment to record thermal readings and heart rates without disturbing the Bobcat family. She documented everything with the same methodical precision Emma had employed, occasionally murmuring notes into a small recorder. By late afternoon, the biologist had completed her initial assessment. The two women returned to the living room, where Mina spread her notes across the coffee table. "The kittens are developing normally, which is excellent news," she began. "Luna, I find myself using your name for her. Shows signs of previous human interaction. See these healed injuries on her flank? The pattern suggests she may have been caught in a trap at some point, possibly treated and released." Emma leaned closer to examine the photos Mina had taken. That could explain her willingness to approach a human dwelling. "Possibly," Mina agreed, "but it doesn't explain Rusty's behavior, which is truly unprecedented in my experience." The discussion continued as daylight faded, exploring possibilities and implications. Finally, Mina set aside her professional demeanor to ask the question that hung between them. "What happens now? What do you want to happen, Emma?" Emma stared into her coffee cup, Mina's question hanging in the air between them. What did she want to happen? The answer that rose immediately in her heart: to let this extraordinary relationship continue, to see where this unprecedented bond might lead, clashed with her professional knowledge of wildlife conservation. "I want what's best for Luna and her kittens," she finally said, meeting Mina's gaze. "As a scientist, I know that usually means returning them to the wild as soon as they're strong enough." Mina nodded, her expression sympathetic. But this situation is unique. The bond that's formed between Luna and Rusty, it's something we don't understand yet. And the kittens are being exposed to both wild and domestic influences during a critical developmental period. Emma gestured toward her notes. There could be tremendous scientific value in observing this relationship as it evolves. The biologist tapped her pen against her notepad, considering. "You're not wrong. From a research perspective, this is unprecedented territory. The implications for our understanding of feline cognitive flexibility, interspecies communication, even the domestication process itself." She trailed off, then refocused. "But there are practical considerations, legal ones too." "I know," Emma acknowledged. "Keeping a wild bobcat and her kittens indefinitely isn't a viable option, but maybe there's a middle path." Outside, the winter afternoon had deepened toward evening, casting the snow-covered landscape in shades of purple and blue. The isolation of Emma's cabin, which had initially seemed like a complication, now felt like an opportunity, a protected space where something extraordinary could unfold away from interference. "Tell me what you're thinking," Mina prompted. Emma leaned forward, her scientist's mind finally finding direction. "What if we treat this as a formal research project? Document the relationship between Luna and Rusty, the development of the kittens, everything, but with proper oversight and a clear timeline for rehabilitation and release." Mina's eyes lit with interest. "Go on." "We know bobcat kittens typically stay with their mother for 9 to 12 months before independence. That gives us time to study this unique situation while preparing Luna and her kittens for eventual return to the wild." Emma gestured toward the window. "My property borders national forest land. I have 10 acres here, with outbuildings that could be modified into a proper rehabilitation enclosure once the kittens are older." "You're suggesting a controlled step down from the current domestic exposure," Mina clarified, professional interest clearly piqued. "From inside your home to a more natural setting, but still within observation range." "Exactly. We'd be following rehabilitation protocols, just with the added element of documenting this unprecedented relationship." Emma hesitated, then added the part she was most uncertain about. "And potentially including Rusty in the process, at least initially." Mina's eyebrows rose. "That's where it gets complicated. allowing continued interaction between a wild predator and a domestic cat during rehabilitation contradicts standard protocol. I know, Emma acknowledged, but nothing about this situation follows standard protocol. Luna sought out human help. She's formed a bond with Rusty that's helping her kittens thrive. If we abruptly sever that connection, are we really doing what's best for this particular Bobcat family? The biologist was silent for a long moment, her scientific training visibly wrestling with the unprecedented scenario before her. Finally, she set down her pen. "I'll need to make some calls," she said. "This would require special permits, university involvement, probably a formal research proposal, but," she smiled slightly, "I'd be lying if I said I wasn't intrigued by the possibilities." Relief washed through Emma. "So you think it could work?" "I think it's worth exploring," Mina qualified. "No guarantees. But I have colleagues at the university who would be fascinated by what's happening here. If we frame it properly, as a controlled study with clear conservation benefits, we might get approval." The conversation shifted to practicalities, documentation methods, enclosure designs, research protocols. As they talked, the scientific possibilities expanded before them. This wasn't just about one unusual bobcat family anymore. It was about potentially groundbreaking insights into interspecies relationships and the adaptability of wild predators. As night fell completely, Mina gathered her notes. "I should head back before the roads freeze over. I'll make those calls first thing tomorrow, start the wheels turning." She paused at the door, her expression serious. "In the meantime, keep everything exactly as it is. Continue your documentation, but don't make any changes to the current arrangement until we have official approval." After Mina left, Emma returned to the spare bedroom. Luna was awake, her yellow eyes gleaming in the dim light as she watched Emma enter. The 4 kittens slept in a tumbled pile against her belly, tiny spotted bundles that grew more distinct in their markings each day. Rusty greeted Emma with a soft chirp, rising from his spot to rub against her legs. The orange tabby seemed to sense the importance of the day's discussions, his manner almost solemn as he returned to his position near the wild family. "We're going to try to figure this out," Emma told them both softly. "Something that works for everyone." Luna's gaze remained steady, inscrutable. Did the wild mother understand that her future hung in the balance of human decisions, that her unprecedented trust in a domestic environment had created a situation without clear protocols? Emma settled into her observation chair, notebook in hand, but her thoughts kept returning to Mina's final question. What did she want to happen? The honest answer was complex, tangled with both professional knowledge and emotional attachment. She had formed a connection with Luna and her kittens that went beyond scientific interest, a sense of responsibility, yes, but also something deeper, a privilege, a trust. The following days brought a flurry of activity. Mina called daily with updates as she navigated university bureaucracy and wildlife management regulations. The proposal was taking shape, a formal research project studying interspecies bonding and its implications for wildlife rehabilitation techniques. Emma's cabin would become a satellite research station, with trail cameras, monitoring equipment, and eventually, a purpose-built outdoor enclosure. 7 days after Mina's visit, as Emma was changing the bedding in the closet nest, she noticed a subtle but significant change in the kittens. The smallest female, whom she'd privately named Shadow for her darker markings, was showing the first signs of eye opening, a tiny slit of blue visible beneath barely parted lids. "Luna, look," she whispered, instinctively sharing the milestone with the mother. "They're starting to see." The bobcat approached cautiously, still maintaining her boundary with Emma even after days of cohabitation. She examined her kitten with gentle nudges, then looked up at Emma with what seemed like shared pride. It was a pivotal moment in bobcat development, the beginning of visual connection with their world, typically occurring between 10 and 14 days after birth. From here, changes would accelerate. Soon the kittens would begin crawling more purposefully, then walking, then playing. Their innate wild instincts would emerge more strongly, and decisions about their future would become more urgent. That evening, Emma received the call she'd been both anticipating and dreading. Mina's voice carried mixed news. The university's on board, the biologist began. They're allocating resources for a formal study. This could be groundbreaking research, Emma. That's wonderful, Emma responded, hearing the unspoken "but" hanging in the air. The wildlife department is more cautious, Mina continued. They've agreed to a modified protocol for this specific case, but with conditions, strict ones. Emma braced herself. Tell me. They'll permit observation and documentation of the current situation for another 30 days. After that, we need to begin transitioning Luna and the kittens to a proper outdoor rehabilitation enclosure. Most importantly, Mina hesitated. After the transition period, all interaction with Rusty must end. Complete separation from domestic influences before final release. The decree settled heavily in Emma's chest, expected but still difficult to hear. The extraordinary bond she'd been witnessing had an officially mandated expiration date. I understand, she said, professional training overriding personal feelings. It makes sense from a wildlife management perspective. I pushed for more flexibility, Mina added. But this was the compromise. 30 days is actually more than I expected them to grant. After ending the call, Emma returned to the bedroom where Luna, Rusty, and the kittens were settled for the evening. In the soft lamplight, they formed a tableau of impossible harmony, wild and domestic, natural adversaries transformed into family by circumstances and choices that defied explanation. 30 days, 1 month to document, understand, and ultimately prepare to dismantle this unprecedented bond. Emma felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders as she watched Rusty gently groom one of the kittens, his domestic gentleness a counterpoint to Luna's wild efficiency. What none of the officials, scientists, or regulations could account for was how the cats themselves would respond to the mandated separation. Something profound had formed in this quiet bedroom, something that transcended human categories of wild and tame. Emma could only hope that the coming weeks would provide enough understanding to do justice to what she was witnessing before time ran out. The cabin transformed over the next week, evolving from remote homestead to makeshift research station. Equipment arrived via university courier, specialized cameras, monitoring devices, and a small collection of scientific literature on bobcat development that Mina had assembled. Emma cleared space in her living room for the technical setup, creating a command center from which to observe and record without constantly intruding on the bobcat family. Most dramatic were the changes in the kittens themselves. Their eyes had fully opened by day 16, revealing the brilliant blue that would eventually mature to their mother's golden yellow. Their spotted coats grew more distinct, individual patterns emerging like fingerprints, unique to each tiny predator. Emma had finally named them all in her notes. Shadow, the smallest female with the darkest markings. Ember, the largest male with russet undertones in his coat. Whisper, the quietest female who made hardly a sound. And Scout, the most adventurous male who was first to explore beyond the nest's boundaries. Luna watched her kitten's development with the attentive focus of an experienced mother, though Emma knew this was almost certainly her first litter. The bobcat had relaxed enough to allow Emma within 6 feet of the nest, a remarkable concession from a wild predator with newborns. She would observe Emma's movements with alert but no longer fearful eyes, seeming to understand that the human represented no threat to her family. Rusty's role continued to evolve in ways that fascinated both Emma and Mina, who visited every 3rd day to collect data and observe. The house cat had become something between uncle and co-parent, his domestic instincts merging with the Bobcat family's needs in unprecedented ways. He demonstrated litter box use repeatedly, groomed the kittens when Luna rested, and even brought toys from around the house, small stuffed mice and jingle balls, dropping them near the growing kittens as if preparing them for future hunting lessons. "He's teaching them," Mina marveled during one observation session. "Not just caregiving, but actual skills transfer. The implications are extraordinary." Emma nodded, watching as Rusty demonstrated a pouncing technique on one of the toys, while the kittens watched with intense focus. "It's like he understands they need to develop hunting skills, but he's adapting the lessons to their current capabilities." "The question is," Mina said quietly, "how will this affect their wild instincts? Are they learning to be bobcats or something? Hybrid?" It was the question that haunted their research, the concern that wildlife officials had raised repeatedly in their discussions about the project. Wild animals needed to develop appropriate wild behaviors to survive after release. Too much domestic influence could create dependence or inappropriate responses to humans, potentially dangerous for both the animals and people they might encounter later. As if sensing their concerns, Luna chose that moment to demonstrate her own teaching. The bobcat mother gently cuffed Ember, who had wandered too close to the bedroom door, guiding him back toward the safety of the nest with firm but gentle discipline. Her wild instincts remained intact, despite the unusual circumstances. "She's still a wild bobcat," Emma noted. "She's accepting help, but she's not becoming domestic." "The balance is remarkable," Mina agreed. "I've never seen anything like it." By the third week, the kittens had become mobile enough to explore beyond the closet nest, their wobbly legs carrying them on short adventures across the bedroom floor. Their personalities emerged more distinctly with each passing day. Scout lived up to his name, always the first to investigate new objects or sounds. Shadow remained the smallest but showed surprising determination, often following her more adventurous brother despite her size disadvantage. Whisper preferred to observe before acting, her quiet nature belying a sharp intelligence that Emma could see in her attentive gaze. Ember, the largest, displayed a natural protectiveness, placing himself between his siblings and any perceived threat. Emma documented every development meticulously, creating a record that would eventually form the backbone of multiple scientific papers. Trail cameras captured moments she might otherwise have missed. Nighttime interactions between Luna and Rusty, the kitten's first attempts at play fighting, Luna's careful hunting demonstrations using the toys Rusty had provided. Yet beneath the scientific observation ran a current of emotion that Emma couldn't entirely suppress. These weren't just research subjects. They were living beings whose trust she had earned through extraordinary circumstances. The looming 30-day deadline for beginning the transition process weighed heavily on her mind as she watched the bonds between all the cats, wild and domestic, grow stronger with each passing day. On day 23, as Emma was preparing the morning coffee, a commotion from the bedroom drew her attention. She rushed to the door to find Luna in a defensive posture, hackles raised as she faced the window. Outside, barely visible against the snow, stood a coyote, lean and hungry-looking, its attention fixed on the cabin with predatory intensity. Emma's heart raced. Had the coyote somehow sensed the presence of the bobcat kittens? Territorial conflicts between coyotes and bobcats weren't uncommon in the wild, but this felt targeted, as if the predator had deliberately tracked Luna's scent to the cabin. Rusty had positioned himself between the window and the kittens, his domestic frame suddenly seeming inadequate against the wild threat outside. Luna's growl was low and continuous, a sound Emma had never heard from her before, primeval and deadly serious. Emma moved carefully to retrieve her shotgun, not intending to shoot the coyote but to scare it off if necessary. As she returned to the bedroom, she saw the coyote had moved closer to the window, its nose pressed against the glass as it tried to get a better sense of what was inside. The scene crystallized something Emma had been wrestling with since Luna first appeared on her doorstep. The reality that, regardless of the extraordinary circumstances unfolding in her cabin, the natural world outside remained governed by harsh laws of survival. Luna and her kittens would eventually need to navigate that world, with all its dangers and competitions. Emma rapped sharply on the window, causing the coyote to startle and back away. Another loud knock sent it loping off into the trees, though Emma suspected it wouldn't go far. She would need to remain vigilant. When she turned back to the room, she found Luna still in her defensive posture, eyes fixed on the window where the threat had been. Rusty remained at his post near the kittens, who had huddled together in response to their mother's alarm. "It's okay," Emma said softly. "It's gone for now." Luna's posture relaxed gradually, but a new wariness had entered her demeanor, a reminder of her wild nature that Emma realized had begun to fade from her perception as they'd settled into their unusual domestic arrangement. She called Mina immediately to report the incident. The biologist listened intently, then sighed. "This complicates things," she said. "If there's a coyote showing interest in the cabin, we may need to accelerate our timeline for the outdoor enclosure. Luna needs to be able to defend her kittens in a more natural setting, and they need to learn appropriate responses to threats." Emma felt a pang of loss at the thought of hastening the transition, but she knew Mina was right. "I'll start preparing the outbuilding today." The old garden shed sat 50 yards from the main cabin, solid construction that could be modified into a suitable transitional habitat. Emma spent the afternoon clearing it out, mentally designing the renovations that would transform it into a space where Luna and her kittens could begin their journey back to the wild. As she worked, Emma kept glancing back at the forest edge, searching for signs of the coyote. The encounter had shaken her more than she wanted to admit, not just for the immediate danger it presented, but for what it represented. A reminder that the bubble of harmony she'd been privileged to witness had always been temporary, a beautiful aberration rather than a new normal. That evening, as Emma sat in her observation chair, she noticed a subtle change in Luna's behavior. The bobcat had moved her kittens back into the deeper recesses of the closet nest and positioned herself at its entrance, more vigilant than she'd been in days. The coyote's visit had awakened something primal in the wild mother, a recognition of dangers beyond the cabin walls. Rusty, however, seemed determined to maintain the connection he'd established. The orange tabby brought one of his toys, a small feathered object, and placed it deliberately between himself and Luna, as if inviting continued interaction despite the day's disruption. For a long moment, the bobcat simply stared at the domestic cat, her expression unreadable. Then, in a gesture that brought unexpected tears to Emma's eyes, Luna reached out one paw and pulled the toy closer, accepting the offering and the companionship it represented. It was, Emma realized as she documented the moment, a perfect encapsulation of the central mystery she'd been witnessing, how two creatures from separate worlds could forge a connection that transcended their natural boundaries, creating something new and precious in the space between wild and tame. The next week passed in a blur of activity as Emma transformed the old garden shed into a suitable transition habitat. University funding expedited the process, providing materials delivered by Ben, who had become an enthusiastic supporter of the project. Together, they installed climbing platforms, natural hiding spaces, and a protected inner den area where Luna could shelter her kittens from the elements. "It's like building the world's most specialized playpen," Ben joked as they secured mesh over the windows, strong enough to keep predators out while allowing natural light in. "More like a halfway house," Emma replied, testing the sturdiness of a shelf that would serve as a high observation perch for Luna, between domestic safety and wild reality. The completed enclosure measured 12 by 15 feet, modest by wild standards but spacious enough for the transition phase. Emma had incorporated elements from both worlds. Natural logs and branches for climbing alongside cushioned sleeping platforms, similar to the closet nest the family had grown accustomed to. A specialized cat door would allow controlled access to a small, secure outdoor run once the kittens were ready for limited exposure to the elements. Most importantly, the entire space was equipped with unobtrusive cameras that would allow continuous observation without human presence, essential for gradually reducing the Bobcat family's association with people. As the habitat neared completion, the kittens reached 1 month of age, a critical developmental milestone. Their blue eyes had begun showing hints of the golden yellow they would eventually become. Their movements had transformed from wobbly explorations to coordinated play, complete with pouncing, stalking, and mock battles that filled the bedroom with squeaks and tiny growls. Luna had begun teaching more deliberate hunting behaviors, demonstrating stalking techniques and the patient waiting that would eventually serve them in the wild. What continued to fascinate Emma and Mina was how these wild lessons integrated with Rusty's contributions. The domestic cat's play-based teaching complemented Luna's more practical demonstrations, creating a hybrid education that the researchers documented with increasing wonder. "It's like watching two different teaching philosophies merge," Mina observed during one of her visits. Luna focuses on instinct and technique, while Rusty incorporates elements of play and reward. The question is whether that combination helps or hinders their development as wild bobcats, Emma replied, voicing the concern that underlay their entire project. The day of transition arrived with a crystalline winter morning, sunlight glinting off snow-covered branches outside the cabin windows. Emma had carefully prepared for this moment, consulting with wildlife rehabilitation experts and following their recommendations for minimizing stress during the move. The plan was methodical. First, familiarize Luna with the new space while the kittens remained in the bedroom. Then, once she accepted it, move the entire family together. Rusty would initially be allowed limited, supervised interaction in the new environment before the gradual separation process began. Emma placed a blanket carrying Luna's scent inside the enclosure, along with some of the bedding from the closet nest. Then she prepared the transport carrier, lining it with familiar-smelling fabric to make it as non-threatening as possible. "Ready for the first big step?" she asked Mina, who had arrived early to assist with the transition. The biologist nodded, her expression reflecting both professional interest and emotional investment. Like Emma, she had become attached to this extraordinary family while maintaining her scientific perspective. Getting Luna into the carrier proved unexpectedly simple. The bobcat had grown to trust Emma enough that when she placed the open carrier near the nest and sat patiently nearby, Luna eventually investigated it on her own. A piece of fresh chicken placed inside provided additional incentive, and within 20 minutes the wild mother had entered voluntarily. Emma quietly secured the door, feeling a mixture of triumph and trepidation. "Good girl, Luna," she murmured as they carried the carrier to the outbuilding. "This is just a temporary change, I promise." Rusty followed them across the yard, his orange coat bright against the snow, his demeanor unusually solemn, as if he understood the significance of what was happening. Inside the enclosure, they placed the carrier on the floor and opened its door, then retreated to the observation area, a small anteroom separated from the main space by mesh that allowed viewing without direct contact. Luna emerged cautiously, her movements deliberate as she conducted a thorough inspection of her new surroundings. She tested each climbing platform, investigated every hiding spot, and examined the boundaries with methodical precision. "She's evaluating security," Mina whispered, watching through binoculars, "checking for threats and escape routes." "And den suitability," Emma added as Luna spent extra time in the sheltered nesting area. "She's thinking about her kittens." After nearly an hour of exploration, Luna did something unexpected. She returned to the carrier and re-entered it, curling up inside as if waiting to be taken back to her kittens. "She wants her babies," Emma said, feeling a pang of sympathy. "She's accepted the space but doesn't want to be separated from them." "That's actually perfect," Mina replied. "It means she feels secure enough here to want them with her. We can move to phase 2 sooner than I expected." Transporting the kittens required more care. Emma placed all 4 in a single carrier, reasoning that their combined presence would keep them calm during the short journey. Rusty watched the process with evident concern, pacing between the carrier and the door as if supervising the operation. "Should we let him come along for this part?" Emma asked, noting the house cat's distress at being separated from his adopted family. Mina hesitated, protocol warring with the unique circumstances. Just for the initial transition, she finally agreed. It might actually reduce stress for everyone. The reunion in the enclosure was both heartwarming and scientifically fascinating. Luna inspected each kitten thoroughly as Emma released them from the carrier, checking them over with maternal diligence before guiding them toward the sheltered den area she had selected. Rusty maintained a respectful distance during this process, but his attention never wavered from the Bobcat family. Once Luna had settled her kittens, the orange tabby approached cautiously, his body language conveying deference to the wild mother's authority. There was a moment of tension as Luna assessed this new element in her changed environment. Then, in a gesture that brought tears to Emma's eyes, the Bobcat touched her nose briefly to Rusty's, acknowledging his presence and accepting his continued role in their shared family structure. "Extraordinary," Mina breathed, recording the interaction. Complete social recognition across species boundaries. For the next several hours, they observed as the family adjusted to their new surroundings. The kittens, after initial wariness, began exploring with typical curiosity, encouraged by both Luna's watchful presence and Rusty's demonstrative investigations of the various platforms and toys. By late afternoon, Emma and Mina had to acknowledge what their data clearly showed. The transition was proceeding more smoothly than anyone had predicted. The Bobcat family had accepted their new environment, and Rusty had seamlessly integrated into the changed circumstances. "We should leave them to settle for the night," Mina suggested as dusk approached. "The cameras will capture anything important." Leaving proved harder than Emma had anticipated. As she prepared to close the enclosure for the evening, Rusty approached the mesh barrier, meowing softly as if questioning whether he was meant to return to the cabin or remain with his adopted family. "That's the question, isn't it, buddy?" Emma said softly. "Where do you belong now?" The research protocol was clear. Rusty should begin spending decreasing amounts of time with the Bobcat family, gradually reducing his influence as they prepared for eventual return to the wild. But watching him sit beside Luna, his domestic orange coat contrasting with her wild spotted fur as they both watched over the playing kittens, Emma found herself questioning the rigid boundaries their plans had established. "Let him stay tonight," Mina said unexpectedly. "Just for this first transition. We can start the separation protocol tomorrow." Emma nodded gratefully, recognizing the biologist's own growing attachment to the unique relationship they were studying. "I'll bring his food out later." As they walked back to the cabin in the gathering twilight, Emma voiced the question that had been growing in her mind since the project began. What if we're wrong, Mina? What if the best outcome isn't complete separation? What if there's something valuable in this connection that we're too quick to dismiss because it doesn't fit our categories? The biologist was silent for a long moment, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. "Science progresses when we question our assumptions," she finally said. "That's what research is for, to test what we think we know against what we actually observe." The answer wasn't definitive, but it left room for possibility, space for the data to lead them somewhere unexpected, if only they were willing to follow where it led. That night, Emma watched the enclosure through the remote monitors, observing as Luna arranged her kittens in the new nest area, with Rusty keeping a respectful vigil nearby. Despite the changed surroundings, the core dynamic remained intact, wild and domestic, somehow finding harmony and shared purpose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the beginning of a separation process that both protocol and conventional wisdom deemed necessary. But tonight, in the peaceful darkness of the transition habitat, the unlikely family remained whole, a living question mark challenging the boundaries humans had drawn between the wild and the tame. The separation protocol began on the second day after the move. Emma stood outside the enclosure, stopwatch in hand, as Mina documented Rusty's behaviors during his now scheduled visits with the Bobcat family. According to the research plan approved by wildlife officials, the orange tabby would spend progressively less time with Luna and her kittens, from 6 hours daily in the first week to just 1 hour by week 3, before contact ended completely. Day 1 of limited interaction protocol, Emma narrated for the recording. Rusty has been with the Bobcat family for 2 hours and will be removed for a 4-hour separation before his second visit today. Removing Rusty proved more challenging than anticipated. The domestic cat clearly understood something had changed, meowing plaintively when Emma entered the enclosure to retrieve him. Luna watched the process with alert attention, her posture tense but not aggressive as her companion was led away. Maternal subject remains calm during separation, Mina noted clinically, though her expression revealed her own discomfort with disrupting the established dynamic. No signs of distress behaviors. Back at the cabin, Rusty paced restlessly, repeatedly returning to the windows that faced the outbuilding. His behavior confirmed what Emma had suspected. The bond formed with Luna and her kittens wasn't one-sided or circumstantial. The orange tabby had developed a genuine attachment to his adopted family. He's showing separation anxiety, Emma told Mina during their midday data review. Classic displacement behaviors, vocalizing, fixed attention on the enclosure location. Mina nodded, adding notes to their observations. And how about you? Are you also experiencing some separation anxiety? The question caught Emma off guard, though she shouldn't have been surprised. Mina had proven remarkably perceptive about the emotional undercurrents running beneath their scientific study. I'm concerned about disrupting a beneficial relationship, Emma replied carefully, from a research perspective. Mina's knowing smile suggested she wasn't entirely convinced by the professional framing, but she didn't press further. When Rusty was permitted his afternoon visit, cameras captured a reunion that challenged conventional understanding of feline behavior. The domestic cat approached Luna with what could only be described as relief, while the Bobcat acknowledged his return with a subtle relaxation of her vigilant posture. The kittens, now familiar with the enclosure, bounded toward Rusty with apparent enthusiasm, initiating play behaviors that he gently reciprocated. "Look at that greeting," Mina murmured, watching through binoculars. "That's not just tolerance. That's recognition of a bonded social member." As the days passed, the kittens continued their remarkable development. At 5 weeks old, they had become accomplished climbers, using the platforms and branches Emma had installed with increasing confidence. Their play had evolved from simple tumbling to sophisticated stalk and pounce sequences that mimicked adult hunting behaviors. Most striking was how they integrated lessons from both their mother and Rusty, combining Luna's stealth and patience with the domestic cat's playful approach to skill development. The separation protocol, however, began showing troubling effects. As Rusty's visits decreased in duration and frequency, both cats displayed signs of stress. Luna became more restless during the domestic cat's absences, pacing the enclosure and showing less engagement with enrichment activities. Rusty's appetite diminished, and he spent hours watching the outbuilding from the cabin windows, his normally relaxed demeanor replaced by tense vigilance. We're seeing negative welfare indicators in both subjects, Emma noted during their third weekly assessment meeting. The data suggests the separation is creating stress for both Luna and Rusty. Mina reviewed the charts showing behavioral changes, frowning slightly. The kittens seem unaffected, though. Their development is continuing on a normal trajectory. For now, Emma agreed. But they're also bonded to Rusty. As they become more socially aware, they might start showing stress responses too. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Ben's truck, followed by a university vehicle Emma didn't recognize. Through the window, she watched as Ben helped an older man navigate the snowy path to her door, a distinguished-looking gentleman with silver hair and an authoritative bearing. "That's Dr. Harmon," Mina said, surprise evident in her voice. "Head of the Wildlife Biology Department. I didn't know he was visiting today." The unexpected arrival of such a high-ranking academic suggested their small research project had attracted more attention than anticipated. Emma straightened her notes, suddenly aware of her cabin's lived-in appearance. Dr. Harmon proved to be less intimidating than his reputation suggested. After introductions, he explained his presence with unexpected enthusiasm. "When Mina's preliminary report started coming across my desk, I couldn't quite believe what I was reading," he said, accepting the coffee Emma offered. "Interspecies bonding at this level between wild and domestic felines. With successful integration during offspring rearing, I had to see it myself." "We're still gathering data," Mina cautioned, "and following rehabilitation protocols for eventual release." Dr. Harmon nodded. Of course. But you understand the potential significance here. This could change our understanding of feline cognition, social bonding, even the historical domestication process itself." His excitement was infectious, and Emma found herself sharing details beyond what had been included in their formal reports. The way Rusty had first introduced Luna to the litter box, how he demonstrated play behaviors that the kittens now incorporated into their developing hunting skills, the apparent communication between the adult cats during care transitions. "Extraordinary," Dr. Harmon murmured repeatedly. "And you say you're currently implementing a separation protocol?" "Required by wildlife regulations," Emma confirmed, "to prepare for eventual release." The professor's expression turned thoughtful. "Understandable from a conventional wildlife management perspective, but from a research standpoint," he trailed off, then refocused, "I'd like to observe them if I may." The visit to the enclosure revealed another dimension of the unusual relationship they'd been studying. As the humans watched from the observation area, Luna was teaching her kittens to climb one of the higher platforms, a motherly pushing and encouraging that guided them toward developing a crucial Bobcat skill. When one kitten, Scout, seemed hesitant to make the leap to a higher branch, Rusty demonstrated the route, breaking it down into smaller jumps that the kitten could manage. "Cooperative teaching," Dr. Harmon whispered, scribbling notes. "The domestic cat isn't replacing wild behaviors. He's scaffolding them, providing intermediate steps." The observation session extended for hours, with Dr. Harmon asking incisive questions and taking meticulous notes. By the time they returned to the cabin, dusk was settling over the snow-covered landscape, and Emma could see the professor's mind working through implications. "I'd like to propose something unorthodox," he finally said, setting down his notebook. "A modified protocol that treats this as a true research opportunity, rather than just an unusual rehabilitation case." Mina leaned forward, interest piqued. "What kind of modification?" "Instead of severing the relationship entirely, what if we documented its evolution through the entire pre-release process? Allow controlled interaction while gradually increasing the Bobcat's independence and wild behaviors?" "Wildlife authorities were very clear about minimizing domestic influence before release," Emma reminded him, though her heart lifted at the possibility. Yes, but that guideline assumes domestic influence is necessarily detrimental to wild success, Dr. Harmon countered. What if, in this specific case, it's providing advantages? The kittens are developing hunting skills earlier than typical for captive rehabilitation. They're showing advanced problem solving. They're learning both wild caution and adaptive flexibility. The conversation continued into the evening, exploring possibilities and concerns from multiple angles. Dr. Harmon's status in the scientific community carried weight that might sway wildlife officials, especially if framed as a controlled research opportunity with potential conservation benefits. As the discussion unfolded, a sound from outside caught Emma's attention, a familiar yipping that sent a chill through her. She moved to the window just in time to see shadowy forms moving at the forest edge. Not one coyote this time, but three, their lean silhouettes visible against the snow as they circled near the outbuilding. "We've got company," she said grimly, reaching for her coat. "The local coyote pack seems very interested in our research subjects." The sudden threat crystallized the theoretical discussions into immediate practical concerns. The enclosure was secure against predator entry, but the psychological impact of coyotes prowling nearby could stress Luna and the kittens. Moreover, it highlighted the dangers they would face upon eventual release, dangers for which they needed to be properly prepared. As they hurried through the snow toward the outbuilding, Emma found herself caught between conflicting imperatives: the wild future that Luna and her kittens must eventually face, and the extraordinary present where boundaries between wild and domestic had temporarily dissolved, creating something unique and potentially valuable. The coyotes scattered at their approach, melting into the darkness beyond the property line. Inside the enclosure, they found Luna in full defensive posture, positioned between the den area where her kittens huddled and the wall nearest where the coyotes had been prowling. Rusty, whose scheduled visit had ended hours earlier, but who had been permitted to remain overnight due to Dr. Harmon's presence, stood beside her, smaller but equally alert, his domestic frame somehow not looking out of place next to the wild mother's battle-ready stance. "Look at that," Dr. Harmon whispered, gesturing toward the two cats. "Cooperative defense. They're working as a unit." The sight solidified something in Emma's mind, a growing conviction that the bond between these unlikely companions wasn't an anomaly to be corrected, but a phenomenon to be understood on its own terms. Whatever decisions lay ahead, they needed to respect the relationship that had formed here, not just dismiss it as an inconvenient complication in standard wildlife protocol. Spring arrived in Montana with the gradual retreat of snow and the first tentative green pushing through thawing soil. 3 months had passed since Luna first appeared at Emma's door, and the transformation in that time had been remarkable. The tiny blind newborns had grown into robust bobcat kittens, their spotted coats glossy with health, their movements increasingly coordinated and purposeful. The enclosure had evolved as well. Under Dr. Harmon's guidance, the university had funded an expanded habitat, a spacious outdoor area adjacent to the original structure, complete with natural features that more closely mimicked the wilderness the bobcat family would eventually inhabit. Fallen logs provided climbing opportunities, carefully positioned rocks created hiding spaces, and a small recirculating stream offered both water and hunting practice. Most significantly, the protocol had been modified following Dr. Harmon's intervention with wildlife authorities. Instead of complete separation, Rusty was permitted controlled interaction, scheduled visits that continued to decrease in frequency but never ended entirely. The new approach recognized the unique nature of what they were documenting, treating it as a scientific opportunity rather than a rehabilitation anomaly. "The latest data is remarkable," Mina said, reviewing footage from the previous night's observation. Emma, Mina, and Dr. Harmon had gathered for their weekly assessment meeting, now a formal research session that generated papers for peer review and presentations at wildlife conservation conferences. The kittens are showing hunting proficiency weeks ahead of typical developmental timelines. On screen, Scout demonstrated a perfect stalking posture, belly low to the ground as he approached a mechanized prey simulator the team had installed. His siblings watched from various vantage points, their attention absolute as their brother executed the maneuver Luna had been teaching them. "And they're retaining appropriate wild caution," Emma noted, advancing to footage of an unfamiliar human approaching the enclosure perimeter. All 4 kittens had immediately retreated to hiding places, displaying the wariness toward humans that would serve them well after release. Dr. Harmon nodded approvingly. "The data supports our hypothesis. Rusty's influence hasn't compromised their wild instincts. If anything, they're developing a more sophisticated behavioral repertoire by integrating both teaching styles." The kittens were now 5 months old. Halfway through the typical period, juveniles would remain with their mother in the wild. Soon they would begin the final phase of preparation for release, with decreasing human management and increased exposure to natural challenges. The question that had hung over the project from the beginning remained: what would happen to the bond between Luna and Rusty when that day came? Emma turned to the most recent footage of the adult cats. Luna demonstrating a hunting technique while Rusty observed from nearby, the domestic cat no longer teaching but still present, a connection maintained despite the gradual shift toward wild independence. "They've adapted," she said softly. "They've found a balance that works for them." The meeting concluded with plans for the next transition phase, moving the family to a larger pre-release habitat, deeper in the property, where human presence would be further minimized and natural challenges gradually introduced. Emma remained behind as Mina and Dr. Harmon departed, their vehicles raising dust on the road that spring had finally rendered passable. Alone in the quiet of her cabin, Emma prepared for her daily observation session. Rusty watched her preparations from his favorite windowsill, his demeanor now calm and accepting of the routine they'd established. The orange tabby had surprised everyone with his adaptability, seeming to understand the gradual nature of his separation from the Bobcat family without displaying the distress that had marked earlier attempts. "Ready for today's visit, buddy?" Emma asked, gathering her notebook. Rusty chirped in response, jumping down to follow her to the door, eager but no longer desperate, a transition that mirrored the evolving relationship between the cats. As they crossed the yard to the enclosure, Emma reflected on how much had changed since that stormy February night when a pregnant bobcat had appeared on her doorstep. The research project had grown beyond anyone's expectations, attracting attention from wildlife biologists worldwide. Emma's documentation of the unprecedented relationship had challenged conventional understanding of feline behavior, suggesting possibilities for interspecies cooperation that no one had previously considered. Dr. Harmon was already discussing a book project, and conservation organizations had expressed interest in applying lessons from the study to rehabilitation protocols. Yet beneath the scientific significance lay something more personal: the privilege of witnessing a connection that defied categories, a bond formed across the divide between wild and domestic that had enriched both participants rather than diminishing either. Inside the enclosure, Luna greeted them with her now familiar acknowledgement: alert attention without fear, recognition without dependency. The kittens were engaged in their own activities, their independence growing daily, though they still returned to their mother regularly for guidance and reassurance. Emma settled into the observation area while Rusty entered the enclosure through his designated access point. The domestic cat approached Luna with the respectful greeting that had evolved between them. Not quite submission, not quite equality, but a unique communication that honored both their differences and their connection. What followed was the ritual that had developed over months of documentation. Rusty would spend time with each kitten, engaging in brief play that increasingly resembled hunting practice rather than domestic entertainment. Luna would observe, occasionally joining or redirecting the interaction based on her wild instincts. The kittens would move between both adult cats, seemingly drawing different lessons from each mentor. Today, however, brought something new. As Emma watched, Luna led her kittens toward the outer section of the enclosure, the area that most closely resembled the wilderness beyond. The bobcat mother positioned herself at a vantage point overlooking the small stream, her posture communicating expectation. One by one, the kittens joined her, arranging themselves in a tableau of wild attention as they focused on movement in the water below. Small fish introduced as part of their natural prey experiences. What happened next brought tears to Emma's eyes. Rusty, instead of joining the hunting lesson as he might have done months earlier, remained at a distance. The orange tabby settled on a nearby rock, present but not participating, as if understanding that this moment belonged to the wild teaching Luna provided. In that tableau, wild mother instructing her young while domestic companion maintained a respectful distance, Emma saw the resolution that had been evolving all along. Not a severing of the bond that had formed in extraordinary circumstances, but a maturation of it, a relationship that acknowledged natural boundaries while honoring the connection that had transcended them. 2 weeks later, as summer approached with lengthening days and warming temperatures, the final transition began. The bobcat family was moved to the pre-release habitat, a 5-acre enclosed wilderness area at the edge of Emma's property that bordered national forest land. Here they would spend the last months before full release, experiencing near-natural conditions while still protected from immediate threats. Rusty's visits became weekly rather than daily, each one a careful navigation of emerging wild instincts and fading domestic tolerance. The kittens, now showing the lankiness of adolescence, greeted him with decreasing enthusiasm as their focus turned increasingly toward the wilderness skills Luna taught. The orange tabby accepted this gradual distancing with a dignity that moved even Dr. Harmon, whose scientific detachment occasionally yielded to the emotional power of what they were witnessing. On a golden evening in late August, Emma stood at the observation platform overlooking the pre-release habitat. Luna and her nearly grown kittens were visible on a rocky outcropping, their spotted coats blending with the dappled light of sunset. Rusty sat beside Emma, watching his former family with attentive ears and calm demeanor. "They're ready," Emma told him softly, scratching behind his ears. "And I think you know it too." The release date had been set for the following week, a carefully chosen time when prey would be abundant and the young bobcats would have optimal conditions for establishing their independence. Luna would be fitted with a tracking collar, allowing the research team to monitor her movements after release. The kittens, now too large for collaring without significant stress, would be tracked through remote cameras placed strategically throughout the forest. As darkness fell, Emma gathered her notes and prepared to return to the cabin. Rusty lingered a moment longer, his gaze fixed on the wild family in the distance. Then, with a small chirp that seemed to carry both farewell and acceptance, he turned and followed Emma home. The morning of release dawned clear and bright. The research team gathered at the pre-release habitat, equipment ready for the final documentation of this extraordinary journey. The gate that would allow Luna and her kittens access to the true wilderness beyond stood prepared, its mechanism designed for remote operation to minimize human presence during the crucial moment. "Ready?" Mina asked as they completed final checks. Emma nodded, her emotions balanced between scientific satisfaction and personal sadness at the impending departure. "They're ready. We're ready." Back at the cabin, Emma had made the difficult decision to keep Rusty inside during the release, a precaution against his following instincts that might lead him into danger beyond the protected boundaries. The orange tabby watched from the window as the humans made their preparations, his demeanor suggesting understanding beyond what anyone might have expected from a domestic cat. The release itself was anticlimactic in its smooth execution. The gate opened remotely, creating an opening to the forest beyond. Luna discovered it first, approaching cautiously, her wild instincts fully reawakened as she scented true freedom. One by one, her kittens joined her at the threshold, their bodies tense with both caution and excitement. Luna looked back once, scanning the habitat that had been their transition home. Then, with decisive movements, she led her family through the gate and into the wilderness that had always been their birthright. The research team tracked them through telemetry and remote cameras as they established territory in the national forest land adjacent to Emma's property. The data confirmed what they had hoped. The family was thriving, hunting successfully, and maintaining appropriate distance from human habitations. Luna's collar signaled her movements in a range typical for a female bobcat with nearly grown offspring, suggesting her wild instincts had fully reasserted themselves. 2 months after the release, on a crisp autumn morning, Emma was awakened by Rusty's insistent pawing at her bedroom window. The orange tabby was perched on the outside sill, his attention fixed on something in the yard beyond. Emma followed his gaze to discover a remarkable sight. Luna, her collar still visible, sitting at the edge of the forest line. The wild mother was alone, her kittens having begun their independent lives according to natural bobcat development. For a long moment, wild and domestic cats regarded each other across the distance that now appropriately separated their worlds. No sound passed between them, no movement bridged the space, yet Emma felt the acknowledgement that flowed from one to the other. Recognition of a bond that had served its purpose and now existed as memory rather than active connection. Then Luna turned and disappeared into the forest, returning to the wilderness where she belonged. Rusty remained at the window a moment longer before jumping down to rub against Emma's legs, fully present in his domestic reality, yet somehow expanded by the wild connection he had experienced. In that moment, Emma understood the true gift of the extraordinary journey they had shared. Not a blurring of necessary boundaries between wild and tame, but a deeper appreciation of how those different worlds could briefly touch, exchange wisdom, and part again, each enriched by the encounter without being diminished by it. Outside, the forest received Luna back into its embrace, while inside, Rusty purred against Emma's hand, wild and domestic, separate yet forever connected by a winter storm, a desperate mother's plea, and the unexpected harmony that had briefly transformed Emma's cabin into a bridge between worlds.